Good evening, everyone, and good evening those of you who are attending at the Law Auditorium. I'm Jeffrey Henderson, Dean of Arts and Sciences at Boston University, and it is my great privilege and pleasure to welcome our community of faculty, students, alumni, and friends to celebrate and inaugurate the first lecture in our new annual lecture series honoring Howard Zinn, Professor Emeritus of Political Science, who was a member of our faculty from 1964 to 1988. The Zinn lectures will feature speakers who, like Professor Zinn himself, offer provocative commentary on the issues and politics of the day. And our day is a day that needs them no less than any other day I can remember. Howard Zinn's contribution to the Department of Political Science, the university, and the national and political discourse are too many and too well known for me to have to rehearse them here. My own kids discovered Howard Zinn's writings in high school and were very impressed that he taught at the same university I did. So I finally got some respect from them. Professor Zinn has been an inspiration and mentor to many, and we hope that the Zinn lectures will highlight his rich legacy for future generations of Boston University students and the wider community. We owe the inauguration of the Zinn lectures to the vision and financial support of an alumnus, Alex McDonald, CGS class of 70 and Arts and Sciences class of 72, and his wife, Dr. Maureen Strafford, Medical School, 1976. They created this endowment as their tribute to Howard Zinn and to ensure that his work will be remembered by future generations of students and scholars at Boston University. We hope that the generosity of Alex and Maureen will encourage others to reflect on the influence that Howard Zinn has had in their lives. Alex McDonald is a founding partner of the law firm McDonald Rothweiler Eisenberg, a Boston and Philadelphia-based consultancy representing plaintiffs in complex personal injury, medical malpractice, pharmaceutical, and product liability litigation. I have to make sure those stairs are secure over there. His cases include, most notably, the largest wrongful death recovery in the history of Massachusetts in the first fen-phen diet pill death case filed in the United States. Maureen Strafford is a pediatric anesthesiologist at New England Medical Center. They are the proud parents of 2 daughters, and of course we hope that at least one of them will follow in their parents' footsteps by attending Boston University. On behalf of Boston University, the College of Arts and Sciences, and David Mayers, chair of the Department of Political Science, our thanks to Alex McDonald and Dr. Strafford. So I give you Alex McDonald.
Thank you, Dean Henderson, and thank you for all being here. The people in this auditorium with us physically, those who are sitting in the law school auditorium, joining us through the virtual reality of television. It is a great pleasure to call myself a proud son of the class of 72 here at the College of Arts and Sciences, that lucky and charmed generation of students who got to spend 1968 to 1972, certainly among, if not the most politically charged, historically significant, socially oriented 4 years that a young man or woman could imagine spending on campus. But because of the man that we're here to honor tonight, the campus life was not merely the life of the classroom, and it was not merely the life of the library. It was, for so many of us, a life that took the lessons of the classroom and applied them in literal senses in the common square of the community, on the streets of the community, in the gathering spots of Boston Common and the ellipse in front of the White House, where we gave our points of view to President Nixon, and around the Washington Monument and so many other places. And that geography had something in common, because wherever people of passion gathered, there was a common thread in the form of a common speaker. Common only in the sense that he was there whenever he was called upon, but uncommon in his zeal and his passion. And that's the man that we're gathering to honor tonight. My hope is that in a real sense, what we will experience over the next couple of hours is Boston University's non-musical version of the climactic scene in Mr. Holland's opus. And Howard and his beloved Roz are great movie fans, and he understands the illusion. The illusion that a great teacher whose life is chronicled over the decades, a man who, as opposed to political science and the world of history, thought that his passions and his contribution as a teacher would lay in the realm of music, only discovers in the later years of his life, at the conclusion of his teaching career, that his masterpiece, that his opus, was not the notes in the musical literature, but rather the countless notes in the form of the students that he touched over his decades in the classroom. And what was true for Mr. Holland is particularly true for the man we gathered to honor tonight. Now, there are many thanks to be given, and I must say that the dean was generous beyond propriety in the singling Maureen and myself out. We are simply the lucky folks who were in a position to start the fund that gives rise to tonight's celebration, but it's a fund that we hope will be supplemented by other people who've been touched by our guest of honor, by his writings, by his words, by his example, and so that 10 years and 20 years and 50 years from now, people will gather in this place on an evening like tonight and be inspired by the example of our honoree. In pulling this together, it would be immodest to suggest that we played any role more than the initial domino in an easy line of dominoes that fell, because once the idea entered our consciousness to honor our guest of honor, the word went out, and countless other people here at BU and in the greater Boston community joined as well with their time and their passion. Three people need to be singled out, and those are friends of Howard's and Roz, who immediately agreed to supplement David Myers and other members of the political science faculty in comprising the board of advisors, the people who will select each year's speaker. They are in two instances with us tonight, in the flesh and the other by proxy, and I'd like them to stand in a moment when the last name is uttered to receive your welcome. First, these are writers all, men and women of immense talent who know Howard not just professionally, but socially and personally, and love him. We begin with that gifted writer, winner of the Pulitzer Prize, a treasure for all of us in Boston, but a treasure in no small part because her writings have now for decades appeared in over 400 newspapers every week as a gold model of what feminism and rational thought and the good life, measured by values that matter, is all about. Ellen Goodman of the Boston Globe. In each instance, these are people that I am very proud to be able to call friends. But our next member of the committee, who's traveled up from New York, is a person bonded not only to me, but much more intimately and much longer period of time with my wife, Maureen, her high school friend of over 40 years, her Barnard classmate, going back 30-odd years, the head of the English department at Barnard at present, but much more importantly, one of the most elegant, gifted, beautiful writers that our generation has produced, the author of Final Payments, The Company of Women, last year's Pearl, a masterpiece, and the just issued The Collected Stories of Mary Gordon. And in the interest of chromosomal diversity, we realized we better have a man join the group as well, but it was not gender bias, it was talent, once again, that caused the selection. The request was made, and instantaneously, as with Ellen, as with Mary, our final member of the Board of Trustees, member of the selection committee, said he would happily be part of this for all the time that may be gifted to him over the decades ahead. And this man has particular ties to Boston University. He was, during my time, the Catholic chaplain over at Newman House. He has gone on from a life of literal spirituality to a much greater, broader, more important, more public spirituality as a writer of incredible insight and moral sensitivity. James Carroll is not with us tonight, but his wife, the equally talented novelist Alexandra Marshall, is. I'd ask all three to stand. Now, some of you may have eclectic tastes in music, as I certainly do, and notwithstanding a Dorchester upbringing, I have a great passion for all kinds of melodies and all kinds of music, save opera, because I'm ignorant, but I do love country western music. And some of you who share that interest and passion may be familiar with a early 70s ballad, a lovely tone poem about heroes, sung by the great, recently deceased Waylon Jennings and his partner in the musical life, Willie Nelson. And the title of that song was, "My Heroes Have Always Been Cowboys." Well, the problem with the Dorchester upbringing in the late 50s and 1960s is that there were so few cowboys for young males or females to emulate. And so at 18, traveling on the Red Line and the Green Line for the first couple of years of my formal education, I would, kind of like Dorchester's answer to Dorothy, come out of the black and white world at one end of the Red Line, and each morning get deposited near Kenmore Square, walk the yellow brick road of Commonwealth Avenue, and encounter great wizards who had a tremendous impact on one's life, teachers of all sorts of discipline. But the greatest wizard of all, the greatest teacher, is the man we're going to honor in a few seconds. And so the problem for me, understanding that cowboys were not literal role models, was how would I reframe that refrain? And it's really quite simple. From the age of 18 in 1968 up until this moment, it is quite true and candid and easy for me to say, my hero has always been Howard. And for those who know the song, the next lyric is equally appropriate, and he still is today. I'd ask you to join me in an event that is 84 years in the making. A half a lifetime ago, 42 years ago, our guest of honor began his teaching life at this university. But in looking through his collection of great works that sit in the library of my home the other night, from LaGuardian Congress through the politics of history, up through the seminal work on civil disobedience, a book that could not be more timely to our lives today as a culture and as a country, a book written in late 1966, early 1967, appropriately entitled Vietnam, The Logic of Withdrawal. As Howard has often said, it was not a birth control manual. But what it was, for those of you lucky enough to secure a copy today, is the past as prologue. I invite anyone lucky enough to secure a copy to read those pages written 40 years ago, to substitute the word Vietnam for Iraq, and you will be bearing witness, as I was reminded the other night, to the gift of prophecy. Because everything said in that book about the logic of withdrawal from that war applies to the one tragically being waged today. So, looking through those books, the obvious suddenly jumped out at me, something that should have been apparent to me but wasn't. And that is, it's somewhat magical that we are gathered here tonight in late 2006, because the guest of honor began his teaching career at Spelman College exactly 50 years ago. So this is a golden anniversary, and this is a night of celebration long overdue. It was 18 years since my professor, for some of you, your professor, graced these halls on a daily basis. But his spirit is still felt. He is a gifted teacher, a prolific historian, and a man who, by his example and words, both spoken and written, have taught this community, this country, and this culture where true north lies in the political constellation. It is my great honor to introduce to you Professor Howard Zinn.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Well, not just for that elegant introduction, but for just being responsible for all of this. All of you people are here because of him. In fact, I am here because of him. Yeah, he got this idea and went with it. I thought he had other things to do, but apparently not. Well, it's sort of a teacher's dream, right? That 30 years later, a student shows up to thank you. But this is going too far. I'll accept it anyway. I want to thank him. I want to thank the Political Science Department, BU, David Mayers, and especially Laura Moore of the Political Science Department, who worked so hard on all of this. I want to thank Karen Fung of Boston University, Dean Henderson. Boston University responded with remarkable enthusiasm. And yeah, I don't know if I will ever get over it. But it's nice to be honored. I admit it. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to honor a man who taught in this building for a very long time. He's not here, not with us anymore, who probably taught more students at Boston University than anybody, any professor in the history of Boston University, who is my closest friend at BU, who walked the picket line with me, who shared with me that little part of the Political Science Department which we called the incurable ward. Professor Murray Levin. Yeah. Yeah. And the other faculty, some of them were here tonight, who were with us in those days, who formed the union, who, along with the secretaries and the technical workers and the custodians and the librarians, all of us went on strike together in 1979. It was a great moment in the history of Boston University. So I want to thank all of them. Yes. And I want to thank also the students of that time. Some of them are here tonight, too. Some of them have come from who knows where to be here. But, the students who marched down Commonwealth Avenue in October 1969, Alex was one of them, who marched down Commonwealth Avenue to join 100,000 people on Boston Common to protest the war in Vietnam. And then those students, and I met one of them just a few minutes ago, those students who in the 1980s set up a tent colony on campus to sort of represent the shanty towns of South Africa to protest apartheid in South Africa. So I want to thank all of these people, and Alex and his wife Maureen, both of whom are the key figures in organizing this whole event and making me feel good. So my topic tonight, I pretend that I care what my topic is, but you have to do this. My topic is bringing democracy alive. It's probably my cell phone, somebody telling me, please, no more. You've done enough trouble. My cell phone has the most remarkable music. Yeah. The bringing democracy alive. So I thought, well, maybe just as a first step, we might join the campaign for the impeachment of George Bush, and Dick Cheney. A double impeachment. And the Constitution says that you are impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors. They meet the qualification. High crimes, 2 wars in a few years, thousands of young Americans dead, thousands more mutilated coming home, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of Iraqis dead, constitutional rights attacked. Just right the other day, a bill passed eliminating habeas corpus and creating the possibility that anybody in the United States, citizen, non-citizen, anybody can be picked up and designated by somebody who has been designated by either Bush or Rumsfeld, designated as an unlawful enemy combatant. And there'll be no recourse and no questions to be asked, no trials, no evidence, no due process, picked up and put away and not heard from again. That's the legal situation right now as a result of the passage of the Military Commissions Act of 2006. That's enough reason for impeachment. It could have been could have had a more drastic basis. Wars of aggression. The Nuremberg trials led to the Nuremberg principles, and which the United States was a signatory to, and for which the Nazi leaders were put on trial and hanged for wars of aggression. The United States government has engaged in a war of aggression against Iraq. I'm not suggesting drastic penalties. A mild, humane, nonviolent, even constitutional penalty, impeachment. And no jail time. Maybe community service. George Bush, a year working at a homeless shelter to just show him that there are people in the United States who don't live on ranches. And we'd have maybe Cheney at the same center to tell Bush what to do. Anyway, I thought I'd start off on a mild note. But I will talk about bringing democracy alive. I guess it'll be a theme throughout whatever I say. I want to read to you something that I came across. We always claim we came across. We don't say we looked hard for something. I just happened to come across this statement by Hermann Goering, one of my favorite writers and speakers. It comes out of actually a book called Nuremberg Diary. It was written by a man who was a psychologist who at the time of the Nuremberg trials was given the job of interviewing the top Nazi leaders who were in prison. And he took notes from these interviews. And he interviewed Hermann Goering and took notes. And I don't know whether although the interpreter spoke German and English, I don't know if Goering spoke to him in English. Goering spoke good English. He was a well-educated man, as many Nazi leaders were. Well, in the kind of spirit of education, let's say, of the Leave No Child Behind Act. You see, that is, they pass the tests. They get high test scores. And, but he asked Goering, how come you were able to bring the German people into this obviously horrible situation, this war which led to millions of them dying and utter defeat? And according to his notes, this is what Goering said: why, of course the people don't want war. Why would some poor slob on a farm want to risk his life in a war? But after all, it's the leaders of the country who determine the policy. The people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same way in any country. It was that last sentence that interested me. It works the same way in any country. You mean it works the same way in a totalitarian state as in our democratic, liberal state? And what does that then tell us about democracy? And what does that then tell us about the state of democracy in our country, if that's the way it works? Well, in fact, when you really inspect the state of democracy in the United States, it turns out there is no very simple spectrum of totalitarianism on the one end and democracy on the other end. There are all sorts of gradations in between. And democracy in the United States is not at the far end of the democratic spectrum. We have a long way to go, really, to be a democracy. We always have. We don't like to say it because it's too easy to just say we're a democracy. And there are just two kinds of places, countries in the world. There are totalitarian states and there are democracies, but it isn't that way at all. I mean, we go to junior high school and we learn about what democracy is. We live in a democracy. How do we know? Well, we have a constitution. We have 3 branches of government. I remember them putting those figures, those drawings on the board. Then we have checks and balances, and they have the arrows going back and forth, executive, legislative, judicial. It was entrancing. And checks and balances. Who can forget that? And if one branch of the government does something bad, it will be checked by another branch. It means nothing can go wrong. Well, of course, then you grow up, and you get out in the world, and maybe you study a little, and you look around, and you find, no, checks and balances doesn't really work. And certainly not in foreign policy, and certainly not in going to war. There are no checks and balances on the president in going to war. The president decides on war, and then Congress, like a whole flock of sheep, goes along. I mean, you can trace this back to every war. Go to the Mexican War of 1846 and see how much debate there was in Congress on going into the Mexican War. 1 hour of debate on going into the Mexican War. We can follow this all the way through. The Congress has never been a check on the president's willingness to go to war, which is really a complete violation of the idea that James Madison had when it was originally written in the Constitution that Congress was given the power to declare war. And Madison said the reason this is so because the president is in the kind of office which is disposed to war. No checks and balances there. And no checks and balances from the Supreme Court. You would think, well, and we learned this, Supreme Court decides what is constitutional and what is not. That's comforting. Until you look at the record. And then you see that the Supreme Court will never stand in the way of an unconstitutional war. And every war we have fought since World War II has been unconstitutional. No Congress has declared war in the way that the Constitution requires ever since the end of World War II. And has the Supreme Court ever made any judgment on this? Well, it had an opportunity during the Vietnam War. It had an opportunity because 3 GIs refused to get on a plane to go to Vietnam. And they were arrested, of course, and they made their way to the Supreme Court. And their argument was, this war is unconstitutional. There was no congressional declaration as required by the Constitution. And maybe these 3 guys had gone to junior high school and learned that the Supreme Court's job is to determine what is constitutional and what is not. And what did the Supreme Court decide? The answer is, it didn't. It didn't take the case. You need 4 Supreme Court justices to even decide to take the case. They couldn't get 4 justices to even decide to take the case. So much for checks and balances. Well, in wartime, forget about checks and balances. And since we seem to be perpetually at war, and we certainly have been at war a lot since World War II, and right now there's a prospect of endless wars, then the status of democracy seems to be rather dismal. And what about free speech? And what about the First Amendment? Now, there too, again, we learn about the Bill of Rights. We learn about the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech and other things. And it doesn't say Congress may make no law abridging the freedom of speech except in time of war. It doesn't say that. It's absolute. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. But what does the Supreme Court decide? Oh, well, when it's wartime, you don't have free speech like you have in peacetime. I mean, the man who said this was a man who is a great liberal jurist in the history of the Supreme Court, Oliver Wendell Holmes. I mean, how can you get more distinguished than that? A man with 3 names. And so, you know, a man was sent to jail. Unanimous decision of the court, written by Holmes, sent to jail for distributing leaflets on the streets of New York against the draft because it's wartime, and we cannot have that kind of freedom in wartime. Well, it's interesting. If you can't have freedom of speech in wartime, when can you have it? And when is it most important to have it? And when is it most important to have free discussion on foreign policy? So exactly at those times, exactly in those situations when you need discussion on foreign policy most, exactly